Good afternoon and welcome to New Options for Old Emergency Phones, Call Boxes, and Buttons. I'm Tim Means, Director of Product Management at Metasecure Solutions, and we're joined by Dave Hockendoner, and he's our Chief Technology Officer.
Hi. Today we're going to talk about common problems with your old emergency phones and boxes and some options for addressing them. We know everyone's busy, so we're going to keep it to about 30 minutes. Please feel free to ask any questions. Just type your question in the chat box. If you have long discussions, we can call you offline, and we'll be happy to send you contact information with a link to our webinar recording.
There's a lot to cover today, Dave, so let's jump right in. Right now, we see that a lot of people are worried about their old emergency phones and call boxes. But first, there's a long list of reasons why an on-site emergency call for help capability is important, even though everyone today has a cell phone. There are a lot of issues with automatically locating people when they call, and in the case of an emergency like an assault or a robbery, in many cases the cell phone may be inaccessible or stolen or broken. We'll host a future webinar about the challenges of using cell phones to call for help, but today we're going to focus on what you can do to solve common problems with your emergency phones and call boxes.
There really are three problems that we see most often. By far, the most common problem we hear about with old emergency phones and call boxes is that a significant number of them just aren't working. And there's no way to tell what's not working without going around and to checking each one.
A second problem we hear about is that your security organization is evolving and the old systems just don't work with the new way of doing things. For example, maybe your old call boxes just dial a phone call to police, but you have a new security setup. You need your call boxes to call your on-site security during the day and your off-site monitoring service at night.
A third problem we encounter is some of these emergency devices are just old and not very effective. Typical examples are panic buttons at industrial sites or in parking garages. Most don't have voice capacities, and some don't connect to security at all. They just sound an alarm. So let's discuss the first issue, non-working emergency phones and call boxes. This is the most common problem, as we mentioned before. A phone or call box stops working, and the worst part is no one knows it's not working unless they walk around and check each box individually. Or worse, someone tries to use one in an emergency and it doesn't work. Obviously, this is a big problem both from a public safety and a liability standpoint.
Right. So you end up scheduling weekly or monthly tests and you go around to each phone or call box and confirm that it's operational or not. Then you keep a log of that information and you store and archive that, and this gets very time consuming, especially in the case where you have a large facility or multiple sites to cover. So having a lot of emergency phones and boxes and not knowing at any given time whether they're working is really the number one problem that we see. And keep in mind, many of these systems were installed back in the 1980s and 1990s and now begin to show their age.
For hardwired phones and call boxes to stop working, some of the main culprits we've seen are underground wires going to the phones. Your situation, of course, may be different. But we've also seen situations where old call boxes are wireless and the problem is related to either solar panels or cellular connections, etc. But hardwired emergency phones and boxes are the most common. One of the main reasons we found that underground boxes aren't working is that moisture has seeped into the underground conduit and ruined the wires or shorting the wires to ground. That just may happen over time. The moisture corrodes the copper wires or causes the wires to short out. You may get a lot of static on the line. Eventually the phone stops working.
And when these outdoor emergency phones stop working, people will fix them for a while and then they set up frequent testing schedules and back to that routine. But assuming that the wires are the problem, you eventually reach a point where you start to look for a change.
That's a key decision point. So at this point, you generally want to decide whether you want to run wires or go wireless. If you choose to run wires, most people upgrade to Ethernet at this point, since it gives you so many more options than POTS, plain old telephone. Or you may want to go wireless with some of your outdoor boxes. We're seeing this a lot for remote locations. For example, far-flung parking lots or remote athletic fields. If you choose to go wireless, you can either tap into a nearby 120-volt power source or outlet, or go solar. Some people still use two-way radios depending on how isolated the spot is. Most choose Wi-Fi, cellular, or wireless mesh for communications.
So the best option for you will depend on your site, your budget, and your public safety needs. So we've laid out some of the various configurations, and next we'll talk about the pros and cons of each one. Let's take a look at the Ethernet-based system. The cons for an Ethernet system are that you still have to pull and maintain wire. This may not be cost-effective for remote locations, and you may be able to pull through an existing conduit rather than retrenching, or you may not. It really just depends on your site. In any case, Ethernet has a distance limitation of about 300 feet between the network switch and the call box. Any further than that, and you're going to have to add switches or repeaters to extend that distance. On the other hand, the pros are that unlike old telephone wires, call boxes that run on Ethernet are generally part of a system that will automatically report the status of each endpoint. You'll be able to see on your computer and software whether each station is working or what faults and situations have occurred. So you don't have uncertainty, and you can eliminate those daily or weekly manual inspections of each phone or call box.
That's a good point, Tim. Your emergency endpoint becomes an IP device. Out of all the wired and wireless options, this gives you by far the most flexibility. For one, adding and coordinating other devices, such as surveillance cameras or access control. Two, connecting the call to a variety of different responders. You can go to a central dispatch or police radios, or say you only have part-time security, you can switch it to 911 when there's no one on site. You can have it email or text people other than the first responders to keep everyone in the loop. And three, if you want your emergency stations to also broadcast emergency alerts out, you can send these alerts from a central location, your security office, EH&S, or whoever is managing your emergency communications for your facility. You can connect the system with giant voice speakers and sirens and integrate them with email and text messaging alert systems. There's a lot of flexibility here. And data and wired connections tends to be more secure than wireless. So what are the wireless options? Well, for Wi-Fi, for example, the cons typically are distance and building limitations. For example, Wi-Fi won't penetrate some buildings very well, if at all. And for example, those with metal sheeting. Parking garages and underground floors are also a problem. You may need to install additional antennas to make the distance. And they're susceptible to power outages. You have to maintain some kind of battery backup in the power closet. On the other hand, the pros are they're very easy to hook up, and most organizations have current Wi-Fi that you can leverage without additional cost.
Okay, so let's take a look at a cellular-based system. The cons for a cellular system are that you have a recurring monthly cost to keep that service up and running, and while this call box component won't cost you additional, you still need to pay that bill. If that service is terminated for lack of payment, then your call box no longer works. The other and probably the biggest problem with the cell phone networks is that this is the same path that everyone's using to call one another, and during emergencies, one of the first things people do is they begin to call each other to either let them know about the emergency event or to find out if they're okay. This causes a spike in demand on the network, and along with those calls, outbound emergency alerts are being sent, and inbound calls are coming from the call boxes. So all of that traffic on the network can slow down the cell network and potentially crash it if it's a high enough demand. And finally, depending on your location where you're trying to implement the system, you may or may not have good coverage from the nearest cell tower. On the other hand, the pros, it's easy to hook up, and you do have a greater range than a local Wi-Fi network.
Wireless mesh is another option. First of all, what's wireless mesh? Well, it's an independent wireless network designed specifically for emergency communications, so it stays up when other networks fail. The downside is it doesn't carry as much data as Ethernet or Wi-Fi or cellular, and voice communications are generally recorded exchanges. Well, that works in some situations. In others, there's no substitute for live voice. The pros are it's extremely reliable. If part of it is damaged, say, in a tornado, the rest of the network routes around the damaged part, so it's self-healing. It's also independent of other systems, so if phone, internet, and power goes down or gets jammed because of emergencies, the mesh system still works. It makes an excellent backup system.
All good points, Dave. As with many things, the answer is often a combination of options, depending on the site of the phone or the call box. In the MetaSecure system, for example, we use a combination of wired Ethernet installations backed up with wireless mesh network and even RBDS radio for sending out alerts to those locations. We can also connect via Wi-Fi for locations where Ethernet is not available. Regardless of what options you choose, if you're upgrading your system, you will probably benefit from looking for a system that automatically monitors its endpoints, an IP-based system. Your system should alert you when, for example, there's been a loss of continuous power and a call box is running on battery backup. Or, for example, if someone has tampered with the device and you have a tamper switch in there and that switch has been triggered, the system should alert you as a monitoring agency or also alert key personnel that you've selected. So, for example, we'd like to show you a short video clip that shows how your system might alert you that one of your units has lost power.
Yeah, here you can see the device on the screen, and if we remove power, an icon will show up stating that that unit has lost power. That could be a building or the whole campus or depending on the location. So very quickly you know exactly which floors or buildings have lost power. You can also cursor over it and see the exact location of what is happening with that. So that makes it very handy from a standpoint.
Okay, so moving on to the next major problem that we discussed earlier with these older systems is that over time security organizations change and evolve. Perhaps you have moved from 24/7 central monitoring to part-time security coverage. Or maybe you move from a centrally dispatched organization to one with officers who are primarily out on patrol. Or perhaps you move to a third-party monitoring service. In most of these cases, the main question is how to connect emergency calls in a way that's more flexible than just a direct phone call to a single location.
With IP technology, whether your system is running on Ethernet or Wi-Fi, calls can be routed in a way that lets your security organization be much more flexible. For example, emergency calls can go to police radios and mobile phones. Calls for help can trigger an announcement to staff in other areas of the facility, letting them know that help is needed and telling them where to go. Calls can also be routed to third-party dispatch organizations. And if there are multiple people in your organization responsible for security and emergency functions, an IP system can keep everyone in the loop automatically. For example, a mobile officer or central dispatcher gets a call, and an email or text message is automatically sent to the police chief, EH&S, or other designated people. People are seeing a lot of benefits from being able to set their emergency help system to mirror their organization setup.
So let's move on to look at the third major problem we hear about with some of the older emergency phone call box systems. In many cases, people's existing systems are just several generations out of date. Classic example of this is the mushroom-type emergency buttons you see in industrial facilities or parking garages. Most of these do not give you a voice connection, so you're flying blind when someone hits the button. Some don't connect to security at all. They simply sound an alarm in the location where the button was pressed. The original idea is that would make a noise during an emergency with the hope of either scaring off the intruder or attracting the attention of security patrol or somebody else. But now, today, expectations for what constitutes sufficient protection have changed, and systems like this may not be enough. Another common example are call boxes with the old push-to-talk two-way radio button that a person in need has to hold down in order to transmit their voice. These are being phased out in many cases because they are not ADA compliant. Such buttons should be hands-free after the initial activation.
Or maybe you just want to do more than is possible with the traditional outdoor emergency phone towers or call boxes. As we talked about before, you may want to be able to see and manage your call boxes via your computer. With new reporting requirements, for example, the Clery Act for college and universities, you may want a way to automatically log emergency call details. And this can be both the time and the event of the event as well as the actual audio recordings themselves. So automatic location transmission is a big issue. It can take people a long time in an emergency to identify the location of an emergency dispatcher. IP-based systems send this information automatically so dispatchers or security can deploy first responders much more quickly.
A lot of people also want to integrate their outdoor phones with live voice emergency call systems indoors, for example, into the hallways and stairwells and elevators. Many emergencies occur indoors, and identifying a location indoors can be even more difficult than outdoors. Or you want to integrate your call box with other important systems and functions, for example, hooking up to surveillance cameras or adding access control or being able to push out emergency alerts in addition to taking inbound calls. All of these options and more are now possible with IP-based systems, and they can make a big difference for the effectiveness of your security and emergency response. For example, here's a short video of how emergency calls and emergency alerts can work together. The sound is playing through our laptop and the audio may not be the best for you listening today, but it will give you an idea of how integrating inbound and outbound emergency communication works.
I'm going to show you how an inbound request for help and an outbound emergency alert can work together in the same system. Let's say I'm the lab manager at the biochem lab. Today, we're going to have a chemical spill. I'm going to request help.
Call for help.
This is security. How can I help you?
Yes, this is Tim Means. I'm at the biochem lab. I'm the manager here and we've had a spill.
Yes, Tim. I see you're on the first floor, room 103 of the chemical building.
That's correct. We had some ammonia hydrochloride that hit the floor here, and I think we need to get everybody out of here.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one, Tim. Let me send a message out and get everyone on their way. In the meantime, why don't you head out too?
Okay, will do.
Thank you.
That's how easy it is to make a request for help. And notice how the security dispatcher identified my location immediately.
As you saw, I just received an important request for help from Tim in the chemical lab. Let me show you how easy it is to send out an alert to evacuate the rest of the building. We can simply click on the building we want to send the alert to, pick one of the alerts. It's already been pre-programmed in the system. That makes it easy and fast. And then we can send the alert by clicking the button. And there's the alert going out that quickly. And from a map I can see that that building's already alerting and everyone is receiving the message in order to evacuate safely.
Material release has occurred in this area. Evacuate this building immediately. Do not walk into or touch spilled material.
So that's just one example of modern options for these call stations. A major consideration that we hear when someone is looking into this type of upgrade is, what from our existing system can we reuse or integrate with? Of course, it depends on the system. For very old panic buttons that don't connect to anything, it may be more cost-effective to simply replace them with a modern system. In some cases, you can get rid of something that's costing you money every month. For example, some cases you can get rid of your old POTS telephone line and eliminate recurring monthly charges.
On the other hand, if your existing outdoor emergency towers or poles are in good shape, and in most cases you should be able to reuse them. If you want to stay with your existing vendor, then they should be able to retrofit their systems into the old towers or poles, and even though they've changed in their design. If you move to something else, the new vendor should be able to pretty easily fit their system into your existing installation. For example, using simple brackets, we can fit a Meta secure help station onto existing towers and poles. And so, if and when you upgrade your system, always ask about what parts you may be able to reuse. Of course, there are many considerations too detailed to get into here, but I hope we're giving you a good overview of the most common problems that people have with their emergency phones and call boxes, along with various directions you can go if and when you decide to make a change to your system.
If we can help you answer questions about the costs of your particular site or any other questions you may have about our system or the overall technology in general, please feel free to email us or give us a call. We'll follow up with a link to the webinar recording along with our contact information. Thanks for joining us today.